set. Okay. Good evening and welcome. I'm Jean McKnight, co-chair of this Housing Plan Working Group. And this open meeting of the Needham Housing Plan Working Group is being conducted remotely, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting is provided via Zoom, but does not ensure that there will be public participation unless required by law. This meeting will not have public comment, but we will be discussing our meeting on March 24th, which will be entirely focused on public comment. But this is partly to plan that meeting. And first, we'll confirm that a quorum of the members of the Housing Plan Working Group are present. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. For those who don't know, Natasha Espada, our co-chair, is unable to be with us tonight. As I said, I am Jean McKnight, co-chair. Is Emily Cooper? Oh, Emily Cooper.
Hi, here.
Ed Cosgrove. I guess Ed isn't with us yet. Laura Dorfman.
Hi, Jean, I'm here.
Yes, there you are. Carol Fischetti.
Here.
Helen Gregory.
Here.
Dan Matthews.
Here.
Oscar Mertz.
Here.
Marcus Nelson. I don't see Marcus yet either. So Michael O'Brien.
Here.
Ed Scheidler.
Here.
Rhonda Spector. Is Rhonda here? I guess Rhonda. Well, I hope Ed Cosgrove and Marcus and Rhonda will be joining us. And also I want to introduce our planning department staff and other staff with us. Lee Newman, our planning director.
Present.
Alexandra Klee, our assistant planner.
Present.
And we have Karen Soonerberg, our community housing specialist.
Here.
And Timothy McDonald is joining us. Present. And pardon me, Tim, please say, I know you're Timothy McDonald.
I'm the Director of Health and Human Services, although the superintendent
you are.
is the Director of Health and Human Resources many times, so I respond to anything. Yes,
Director of Health and Human Services, and very much appreciate your being with us tonight. Brother, that's embarrassing. And for those participating in the meeting, please be aware that others are able to see and hear you, and anything that you share or state will be a matter of public record. All supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website, www.needhamema.gov/housingplan2021. And the ground rules for this meeting are designed to allow for an accurate public record. Each of the speakers on our agenda will be introduced, and then after they conclude their remarks, each working group member will be asked by name for any comment, questions, or motions. All votes will be by roll call. And for those who are attending by Zoom, but who are not members of the working group, any written comments you wish to make can be addressed by email to planning@needham.ma.gov. with a subject line, Housing Plan Working Group. And those email messages will be shared with the entire Housing Plan Working Group.
Just a quick correction. There is no dot between Needham and MA, so it's just planning at needhamma.gov. 2 M's right in a row.
Thank you. Need a correction here so I don't make that mistake again. Needham, MA, but then there's a dot gov. Okay, thank you very much, Alex. So do we want to just quickly approve the minutes from our February 10th, 2020 Housing Plan Working Group? Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes? So if you're satisfied with them, may I have a motion to accept the minutes of February 10th, 2022?
A motion to accept the minutes?
Second,
Thank you. And a second. So motion made by
Cosgrove,
Michael
second.
O'Brien and seconded by Ed Scheidler.
Cosgrove.
There you are, Ed. Ed Cosgrove is with us now. And so I'm going to do a roll call on accepting the minutes, and I'll just go according to the people as I see them on the screen. Oscar Mertz,
Yes.
Ed Scheidler,
Aye.
Dan Matthews,
Yes.
Helen Gregory. You're muted. There you go, Helen. Michael
Yes.
O'Brien,
Yes.
Laura Dorfman,
Yes.
Emily Cooper,
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove,
Yes.
and Carol Fischetti.
I'm going to abstain just because I wasn't at the last meeting.
Oh, all right. Very good, Carol. And the chair votes yes, co-chair rather votes yes. So the minutes are accepted of our February 10th, 2022 meeting. I know that for the past couple of meetings, the concept of having subgroups has been discussed, and there's been emails to suggest different combinations of subgroups. And Natasha Espada sent a list that has 4 subgroups labeled zoning with Oscar Moritz and Laura Dorfman. And I emailed back saying I had asked to be on that zoning group also. Then capacity building, Michael O'Brien and Natasha. Housing preservation, Ed Cosgrove and Emily Cooper. And housing development, Helen Gregory and Rhonda Spector. Now, I think we also got an email later from
So I think Natasha,
Emily Cooper, who said what she really wants to be is on the housing development team. Is that right, Emily?
yeah, I think Natasha actually sent out she had made a few changes. So there's a more recent email from Natasha with different groupings for a few people.
Well, I'm very sorry I missed finding that. I was trying to print out what I thought was the latest version, and apparently I didn't.
I think the only discrepancy from what I understood from what you read was as it related to Emily. I think otherwise it was accurate.
All right, Emily
maybe.
Cooper. would
No,
go
I
in
think Laura
housing
Dorfman
development,
said-
and Jean McKnight presumably would go in zoning. So that means it's really only Ed on housing preservation.
With Laura.
Ed Cosgrove, that is.
Oh, Laura.
He's joined by Laura.
Oh, by Laura Dorfman.
Yes.
Oh, excellent, because that's what I was hoping, because I know, Laura, that you are interested very much and knowledgeable about that.
Ed is not alone.
Thank you. I don't know how knowledgeable I am, but and I'm also not on the zoning group, in the zoning group.
Okay, so off,
So,
all right.
You want me to forward you the last email that I have from Natasha? Is that, or put it on the?
I'll find it
Okay.
later. I want to
Okay.
go through this,
Okay.
So I think I've got it right now.
Okay.
Zoning would be Jean McKnight and Oscar Mertz. Somebody's there, put it up. Excellent. That's the way to do it. Michael O'Brien, and then capacity building, Michael O'Brien, Natasha Spada, housing preservation, Ed Cosgrove and Laura Dorfman, and housing development, Helen Gregory, Rhonda Spector, and Emily Cooper.
And Jean,
Mhm.
excuse me, it's Carol Fischetti. I had emailed Natasha because I would like to be added to capacity building.
Oh, Carol Fischetti. All right, I'll write that down myself in my notes,
Thank you.
and we'll make sure that happens. Carol Fischetti. And I think that, considering your role on the finance committee, I think that's
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
that would be very helpful. So I think we've got that right now. Lee Newman, I was Ed Scheidler, you have a question?
I had requested the zoning committee.
Oh, all right, well, we'll add you to that, Ed. All right, so we'll make a couple of changes. We'll add Ed to zoning, and we'll add Carol to capacity building as compared with what was shown on the screen. Lee, are you prepared to discuss process for the meetings for these subgroups?
Sure. The process, the meetings that these subgroups participate in all have to be done under the open meeting law, which means they need to be posted meetings. And then I think there are a couple of strategies to allow you to meet. I think one option we could offer would we would do a posted meeting, and you could meet in PSAB, which is where the Planning and Community Development Department is located, during normal office hours. The other option is if working it out during the day doesn't work on your end, the town hall is having some public meetings, and we could try to schedule a meeting on a night when other boards are meeting and there's a monitor in the building. Again, that would be a posted meeting, and you would just meet in a room that we would reserve for you at town hall. The third option, we could make work if that's what folks want to do. It just takes more staff time on our end, because we are doing this meeting by Zoom, but we're doing it through our webinars. So in a sense, a staff member would begin the meeting, would begin a webinar meeting, and then would transfer it over to a member of the committee who would be responsible for basically handling the recording of that meeting, and then closing it out. And then all of these group meetings, there needs to be notes taken of them, of what actually transpired. So, I mean, I think that's the process that would have to be followed. And I think those, depending upon, what worked for your particular group, Alex and I could work with you to help facilitate that.
So there would not be, it's just not possible to have our staff attending these meetings and be responsible for producing minutes. So the notes that Lee mentioned don't have to be elaborate. Just, who was at the meeting, what were the topics covered, and the time of the meeting. But those essentially minutes should be kept of each of the meetings. And as long as they're posted and in a public place, that's sufficient as far as public participation goes. Carol.
So if the meeting though is on Zoom and recorded, doesn't that obviate the need for minutes?
We generally haven't treated it that way.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I could find out the answer to that, but we haven't treated it that way. We do minutes and we have the Zoom meetings.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I think all the public boards are still creating minutes, as well as having the meetings be, available through Zoom. And I know it's kind of a pain, but we're not going to be fussy about those minutes. It's just a matter of, writing down the basics. And that's helpful for any committee, to keep track of what you're doing and remember what you worked on last week. And, so it's not really a waste of time. Shall we leave it to each of the subcommittees to decide who's going to be the facilitator as far as emailing around on meeting dates and times? And
It will need to be coordinated with the staff because, the meetings need to be posted and the posting needs to be out 48 hours, ahead of the meeting, and weekends don't count and holidays don't count. So, there needs to be some thought, about what your meeting schedule is going to be and some advance notice to us. So we can make sure that you're legal when you are meeting and we can find you the space in which to meet. If that's the vehicle that you're going to use, or that if you're doing a Zoom meeting, there's a way for us to facilitate the opening of that meeting and there's staff available to do it.
And if Natasha was here, because she's the one who's given most thought to this, she might be able to speak to this, but as far as the role of the subgroups and when they will report back and how those subgroup reports will fit into the overall plan.
I think we were looking to have the subgroups work done by, I think, the end of May. So that we had that information as we're beginning to prepare, the drafting of the plan for the community-wide forum that we're, talking about having in September. And I think Karen Senneborg had suggested a framework, or just a broad framework of some of the issues and strategies that she thinks would be helpful if you addressed in your deliberations. And so we can put together a memo that kind of, codifies what we're talking about tonight, which is, the subgroup assignments, what the process is, for meetings and how that should all work. Perhaps a suggested framework for providing information back, and a timeline in terms of when we would need the information back from you.
Emily Cooper.
Well, I think actually Dan had his hand up first.
Oh, I'm sorry,
And then
Dan, I
I'll
didn't notice. Dan Matthews, please.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, I think you seem pretty set on going down this path, so I won't argue at length, but I have expressed my concerns about this in two areas that are of concern. One has to do with the fact is this structure carries with it some pretty significant administrative burdens on a staff that's already got a lot, it's already pretty well stretched out, as well as open meeting and public records law compliance requirements. Now, Lee is presenting an outline about how to handle that. I'm not gonna argue with that, but it is a concern. But another one is, and larger, is that I think if you're creating subcommittees, the first subcommittee that you should create is a steering committee. And one of the charges of that steering committee should be to work on the draft housing plan, which, going back to the original work outline for this group coming from the planning board, is that is the primary work product that this committee is being looked to. And our current structure really precludes any material active participation by almost all of the members. I know you've worked very hard on it, Jean, but the rest of us are not in the room, and our names are all on the front page. With a steering committee, you could have a group of members of this committee that could have participated, for example, in discussing how you're going to manage these administrative issues around the open meeting with your subgroups. And also a steering committee could do things to adjust planning for future events and so on, most of which simply had to come here in final form for once a month meetings that the committee either has to accept or stop work. So I think you should have a steering committee. You've got a range of experiences and you have some people that are very busy with other committees, almost no other time. And there are other people who have a lot of experience and a significant amount of free time that they could put into this. They should be in the room when you're doing the work plan, when you're scheduling the meetings and thinking about what the content is going to be, and when you're doing the work on the revisions of the draft housing plan. We had the first draft housing plan on January 26th. I know you received some comments, but we've never discussed them here in any material form. And I know that there's work on a revision, but it hasn't come back to us yet. So I think that a steering committee with that charge would be very valuable to the work of the group. Thank you.
And Dan, first of all, let me apologize. I had printed out your emails and attached them and meant to reference them and discuss what you said about the steering committee. You know, as is commonly done with committees, I know the planning board has chair, vice chair meetings with staff. The select board has chair, vice chair meetings with staff in order to prepare for the upcoming agendas for coming meetings and decide when something is going to be taken up. And those meetings are considered not to require notice and minutes because they're planning the agenda, which is an exception to the open meeting law. And we have what I kind of refer to as the team, and that is Natasha and I and Karen Sunabroad and Lee Newman and Alex Klee. And we do the same thing, you know, between each meeting or in preparation for each of the work group meetings, we get together and discuss what the agenda is going to be, how we're going to handle this and that. But I think what you're proposing goes beyond that, Dan. It goes, it's a focus group that's really going to dig into and have an important role in the drafting of the final plan. Now, one way of thinking about it is there could be one person from each of these subgroups on that steering committee. Is that something we should further discuss tonight? Or I know, of course, our next meeting is on the 24th, which is a public meeting. So maybe we should, Lee, I seek your guidance on how we should bring forth that idea, make a decision about that idea at our meeting tonight, because otherwise we'll be putting it off until April.
Well, I think it's up to the group to decide whether or not they feel that that's a function, that an element that they want to add to this protocol. Okay,
well, okay, I want to turn to Emily Cooper, and I also want to make sure I welcome Marcus Nelson and make sure the public knows that Marcus Nelson, member of our select board, is with us now. But Emily, why don't you make the comment or question you had, and then we'll go back to the.
Well, and I'm also happy to wait because I feel like it's a slightly different topic. I just wanted to make sure we were able to have a conversation about the subcommittees, not just the format, but the actual charge. That what is it that we are asking the subcommittees to do? You know, housing development is a huge topic. What is it by the end, the work done by the end of May? What would be success? Like, how would we define that this subcommittee did what it was supposed to do and came up with whatever it is that we'd like by May? And so that's one of the things and maybe that fits into Dan's question, which is, you know, is there some need for a steering committee to come up with these, this is how it's going to work, and here's what success is and what we want, or is that done elsewhere?
Mm-hmm. I'll respond only partially to that. Since I said, oh yes, I'm interested in zoning, what I see as the task for that subcommittee is to follow up on the very good work that Lee Newman and Dan Matthews and Karen Sunnaborg in particular, and others in our town leadership have been involved in, and that is responding to the MBTA communities act and regulations, and that zoning subcommittee would focus on what is required of Needham to comply with that, and how we would go beyond reporting on the multifamily housing and zoning that we already have, and because presumably we need more than that, and where would we look in our town to create more multifamily zoning that would meet the MBTA regulations. Of course, they're not final yet, either those regulations. So, and others who indicated they're interested in capacity building or housing preservation or housing development might have their own ideas about that. Have we produced something that I missed, or at least should have had in front of me for this meeting on what the role of each subcommittee would be, Lee?
I think Karen, do you want to walk through the outline, at least the tentative outline that you had come up with that would kind of link back to the housing plan on what you thought the four components ought to be? This is the beginning kind of conversation, because I think you were trying to link it back to the housing plan so that we would have something that was in sync, which was, I think, the current status, the next steps, the resources required, and the time frame components.
As a matter of fact,
I
I do have it here. It's your email of Friday, March 4th. But it didn't go out to the entire group.
No, we were contemplating putting together a memo ahead of this meeting, but we felt it hadn't received enough kind of discussion to do so. Part of what we wanted to do is provide some framework for groups, kind of fleshing out information that would be helpful with respect to particular actions to be included in the housing plan. And, one would be, for example, the current status of the action. What, for example, has the town done in the past with respect to this? What are some of the requirements? And also, what are other communities doing with respect to this particular action? I think we want to have a housing plan that shows effective models, not only what's worked in Needham, but what's worked in other comparable communities as well. So kind of a look at kind of the current context for the action. And then to look at next steps. What is the town going to have to do to actually implement that action? As far as approvals or any number of requirements. We also want to look at what resources would be required to undertake that particular action. And then to also look at, projecting numbers of units potentially, given some actions aren't going to actually directly create units. Others, we might want to have some real goals about housing units. So we'll follow up after we've kind of been able to have further discussion on this. We'll follow up with a memo that does provide a time frame, provides this kind of framework. As far as the subgroups, I think that my understanding of how Natasha has kind of, her idea how these subgroups would work is that they would take on certain actions and actually flesh them out in writing. So there would be some real effective contribution in some written way to the plan that I assumed we would be assimilating and then providing it back to the group. I got to say that the actions that we received as part of the public education listening session that Natasha kind of summarized and categorized under the various subgroups, I mean, that is not an inclusive or exhaustive list. There are things that weren't mentioned, for example, that the town would like, has been discussing in the past. For example, under zoning, besides the MBTA community, there's been discussions about inclusionary zoning on a town-wide basis.
Mhm.
So I think each subgroup needs to kind of look at, what they consider important of those subgroups. I'm happy to kind of, make some suggestions as well. We have included as a handout for the 24th, the workshop on the 24th, some potential strategies that were mentioned as part of the working group comments, as well as what was included in the 2007 plan that provides some important information. In fact, the list of the comments that we received, recent comments that we've received, largely attributable to Dan, but we've heard echoes of all those strategies, in the past, and they are, they should be kind of hashed out during this planning process for sure. I don't know if I've been totally helpful, but we will be following up with folks on this framework to give you some help.
And so, as Lee said, and you're saying also, the planning staff will produce a memorandum that follows up on ideas that have come from various people on the role of these subgroups, and set it out to guide each group and seek comment from the groups themselves, so as to strengthen that framework and target the framework for the groups. And we can do that by having the memo go out and then having the subgroups meet and respond as to any changes they want to make to the framework. And if that's acceptable to everyone as a way of moving forward, then shall we go back and talk about a steering committee, as Deanne had suggested, as being kind of a separate group from the subgroups. And because I suppose that steering committee, it's not just a chair, vice chair, and staff group. It's it also would have to post meetings and have minutes. And Dan is nodding. Of course, that's right. I don't know if we're prepared tonight to have people say, "Oh, yes, I want to be involved in that," or we would organize that by. I send around again Dan's ideas about what the subgroup's purpose is, which I think are very good, and then see who wants to be on it and move it forward that way. Laura Dorfman has her hand up, perhaps to respond on that.
Thank you, Jean. It's more of a question. So on some other commissions / committees I'm on, things are dealt with. Items are separated amongst groups of people and they're handled, but they're not handled and everything's reported back through staff to the committee, but they're not handled in this formal way of having this, if you want to call them subcommittees or these subgroups of people, scheduling time and having recordings and having minutes taken and having all of those separate meetings documented. I'm just wondering, is that, do we have to do that? Is there something different about this committee that makes that formal process have to exist? And I'm new to this, so if I'm,
Can I just ask something?
First, let me ask for clarification on what Laura said. When you speak about the groups you're involved with, are you speaking of public bodies, such as you're on the Historic Commission, right, in the Community Preservation Committee? So you are speaking of other public bodies in your experience.
Yeah, and I'm not trying, I don't want to get anybody in trouble or I'm not,
No.
But I'm saying like work is assigned amongst the group because that's why you have a committee, right? Because no one can do it on their own. But we don't have this, I don't see this level of formality with every meeting being separately noted, documented, and having separate meeting minutes being reported back up to the rest of the group. So I'm just wondering, why does that have to happen?
Well, I think that Lee Newman consulted with our town council and even did so twice. Lee, do you?
I consulted with him twice because in the past I've kind of run things the way you described. But he felt that really to stay kosher with the open meeting law, that they really were groups that were coming out of this working group. They were talking about issues that, that were going to impact the plan. And his opinion to me was, even I had a second conversation with him today to say, are you sure? And his opinion was, yes, we need to be following the open meeting law and posting these meetings, and people should have a right to hear what's being discussed. And that really his recommendation was that we do follow that formal process.
Understood. Thank you. I am not implying in any way whatsoever that any of these committees or commissions are not following the open meeting law protocol, because I'm sure that they are not doing anything that that would be in violation of the sunset provision or anything like that. I understand what you're saying, and I understand why council would say that, but things are run differently on different committees. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, we have to move to our other business here too, and that is planning the meeting on the 24th. Can we leave it that we're going to, with regard to the subgroups, staff is going to provide a memorandum that will outline, similar to what Karen did in her March 4th email to Natasha and me, I realize, and what the work of each subgroup would be, and not the topic, but the outlining the work as she did orally just now, and Lee will also present their how the meetings have to be organized, and then we'll go forward from there. And then as far as the steering committee goes, we'll do the same thing, a memo, ask for volunteers, and see who wants to do that, and then get that organized. And is that sufficient to leave it at that for tonight? All right, let's see. Emily, I think had her hand first, and then I'll move to Dan. Yeah, Emily.
Thanks, Jean. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of clear, and this has been really helpful. So when I look at the housing development, the email that went around, it had topics like housing options for people with disabilities, senior housing, starter housing, connection to the Needham Housing Authority, bringing the SHI to actual 10%. And I think what I'm hearing is that the subcommittees have the autonomy to choose from that list of things as to which of these things we'd like to focus on, and that the larger group would be okay if we came back and said, well, we chose to focus on starter housing and senior housing and not do the other things. Or are there, so I just want to make sure that that's what I'm kind of hearing, that these topics are pretty broad, and we can choose to, because obviously we can't boil the ocean. We're not going to be able to do everything, and not by May. We're going to have to choose one or two of those things, and the subcommittees are able to make that choice ourselves. I guess that's a question.
I agree. I certainly agree with you, Emily. And since Lee is the one who's going to be putting together this memo, Lee and Karen, I think that's pretty much what Lee had said when she said she'd go back, or Karen said you'd go back and see what came out of the listening session and organize those ideas. And it might be suggested that a certain set of ideas seem to belong to one group, but it's really up to the group what they want the focus of their work to be. And Lee is nodding, and I think we all get that message that would be the way it would go. Okay, Dan is next.
Yeah, I think the plan that you've described about talking about a steering committee is excellent. That would work. And a way of framing that is presumptively a steering committee will include the two co-chairs. And so if you ask the other members who the other members would be interested in serving on a steering committee if we were to form one, and then once you had those expressions of interest, you could report back a recommendation to the group to vote on designating a steering committee of the people that you recommend.
Right. Yes, I think so, Dan. And I agree with you that it does make sense for the co-chairs to be on the steering committee. It's similar to the work we've been doing just in our leadership team meetings, the kind of co-chair meetings with staff. Oscar Mertz, please. Yeah.
I would love to take Karen up on her offer. I think one of the things is in our initial meetings, I suspect, as Emily was saying, we're going to try and brainstorm. And so, Karen, I don't know if that means we could, if we're all in person and we Zoom you in, or if we connect you somehow, if you're capable of participating in maybe one of those initial sessions or the initial session. I'm thinking back to your comment, and I think the general thought was that what we're doing aligns with the housing plan that we're drafting. So the idea of potentially focusing on one or two things, but at least doing some sort of an outline or some sort of maybe more comprehensive list, at least to hit categories or summarize the various areas of zoning that we would want to address. So we've shaken the trees, let's say, and we've put as much as we can our thought around the bigger picture, and then we can pick something to choose and to focus on. So I'm just wondering if you can think about a way you could participate in that initial brainstorming, because I think that's probably the most critical meeting, is to just get our heads around everything and options and breadth of the subject. And then you would be probably a great resource for that, and you might be able to help us tie it back. So
I'll tell you what, I had, given everything that we're working on, I hadn't planned on, going to any of the subgroup meetings. If you schedule them and there's the initial one and I can make it, I'll make every effort to do so.
Well, we'll just keep you in the loop as we're organizing, and if you can, that's great. But I understand, obviously, that spreads you much thinner. But we might reach out to you if we have a summary of questions or something.
Sure.
And I expect that each of the subgroups will have perhaps housing staff members from the town that they wish to reach out to. For example, staff of the school department with regard to a capacity building, or housing preservation. Maybe the building inspector would come to a meeting. I'm not saying, oh, never, staff just doesn't have the time. I think that there would be occasions when each subgroup would want to reach out to a staff person in the town to help with the work and advise them. Not regularly, not every meeting, but occasionally.
Okay.
All right. So I think we're all set with that, with both the subgroups and the steering committee. And what we want to make sure we do at this meeting is plan for the community housing workshop. And Karen's on board. We sent around materials. There was a memorandum, a community housing plan memorandum, something that we would distribute to people who sign up, presumably. And this was the three-page potential housing goals and strategies. There also was a proposed agenda sent around, and also instructions for the roundtable brainstorming and breakout groups. And of course, you also saw the flyer and the press release. And you may have already seen from groups you're involved in that this March 24th event is already starting to get some publicity, and I'm glad to see that. Lee, may I turn this, Karen, may I turn this over to you now on discussion of plans for the
Sure.
community housing workshop?
Sure. So we've laid out an agenda and kind of instructions for breakout groups that really echo what we did for the 2007 plan, and which I've actually kind of worked on many times in communities over the years and has been, I think, productive. We have decided to conduct the workshop virtually. Maybe at some point, Alex has volunteered to coordinate it, and we'll actually be able to, all participants will be present for the first part of the agenda, which is a welcome and introductions. And then I will go through as expeditiously as I can the PowerPoint presentation, which you folks have already seen in the past. And then we're going to go into breakout groups, and Alex is going to kind of shift folks into various small group discussions, and we'll assign facilitators to those groups. And we assume that working group members might be interested in doing some facilitation of these particular groups. And the handout that we sent out about potential goals and strategies really is meant to just help inform some some of the work during these small breakout groups. But we have a pretty ambitious agenda. There's a lot to get through. These typically take 2 hours, almost exactly. We, in addition to assigned facilitators, each group will identify a recorder who will take notes on everybody's comments. And the first part of the breakout groups would involve just simple, quick introductions of each member with kind of an icebreaker question on what does affordable housing mean to you? And everybody in these breakout groups, the facilitator is there to really keep things moving according to the time frame and make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak on the particular questions included in the instructions. And there'll be notices from time to time about moving on or where people should be at. But so the first question is basically an icebreaker and an introduction. And the next several questions relate to visioning. So the housing needs assessment presentation is basically where have we been, where are we now with respect to housing issues? The visioning questions are meant to be, where do we want to go aspirationally as far as goals to get to kind of address local needs. And the 3 questions that we offer.
Karen, may I ask, could we put this up on the screen so that people can see them as you're talking about them, the instructions?
Yeah. Alex, can you do that?
Instructions for roundtable, and the agenda is pretty simple. We could put that up on the screen too, but I think that's pretty basic. Welcome summary, PowerPoint, breakout is what the proposed agenda says. But it would be good if we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Roundtable breakout groups that people have that in front of them to take a look at. It was part of the material set out for this meeting, correct?
Yeah, and well, Alex, you're trying. Well, she's trying to get it up. I can just continue, so we're not losing time and see.
Sure.
So under visually, the questions are, what's the town's greatest challenge related to preserving and producing housing affordability and diversity? Excellent, Alex. Next one, what's an appropriate housing goal? And we're talking about something aspirational to strive for in the years ahead. And the workshop handout we set out includes the 4 housing goals that were part of the 2007 housing plan. It'd be good to get some feedback on, are these goals still relevant? Do they need to be tweaked? Do we need to add something? So we're really looking for some feedback on that. And also looking for some information on best locations for new housing development.
Karen, do you mean you're looking for feedback at this upcoming forum or tonight?
No. This is all on the community housing workshop. So
Yeah.
this is for the roundtable discussions.
Right.
I'm not, no. So this is what these are the instructions for the facilitators, for the groups during the workshop on issues that we would like to have feedback. And this is a draft. If people feel that we have to, some questions should be nixed and, others added. It's just that time, we've got to be very careful about time because we're asking people in turn to provide comments on these questions. And that's where the facilitator is very important to making sure that everybody gets a shot at a comment or an answer and it's moving along. It's not getting stalled. Not easy to do, but that's what we're really relying on facilitators to do. And so with these 3 visioning questions, and we allocate about 25 minutes for that, we get into the meat of the workshop is really the actions. And in turn, the facilitator asks each participant to indicate what they think are the 2 most important actions or strategies the town should take to, better and promote housing affordability, diversity in the community. And once again, we did provide this memo that includes those strategies that were in the 2007 plan, as well as a list of strategies that have come up repeatedly. And after, once again, the recorder is keeping notes on all of this. And then we ask each member to go through and prioritize actions from everybody who has, provided comments about their suggested actions for the group, then to kind of prioritize them. So we move from where does the town want to go with respect to its housing agenda to how does it get there through specific actions and focus. And so the recorder is keeping tabs on all these actions. Ultimately, we're asking each group to come up with their 6 top priority actions that will then, the whole group, all participants will be reconvened, and each recorder of a group will present their priority actions. Typically in an in-person type of community workshop, we then have a kind of a voting process where people get kind of stickers and can vote on where they think the most important strategies are. Because this is held virtually, what we'll do is follow up with a poll to all the participants. We will have, because we're asking people to register, we'll have email addresses, and we'll get back to everybody with a list of the priority actions and ask people to vote. And then there'll be a short wrap up and next steps. That's what we're proposing.
Well, let's see what questions and comments people have. I see 2 hands raised. Laura Dorfman.
Thank you. So I guess my question is, should the framework of what the subcommittees are focused on be based on this feedback versus trying to determine it beforehand?
Well, certainly the information we get from this workshop will be important information for the subgroups. But you know, I think based on what we've heard so far, that subgroups can get started on some of the more obvious actions in their list. But we are doing this to get important input from the community, you know, to continue to get that kind of feedback. And so that will be helpful to each of the subgroups.
Thank you.
And Emily Cooper?
Thank you, and thanks for putting this together. I can tell that you guys spent a lot of time thinking it out, so I really appreciate that. I have just I have 4 things. 3 are real small. One, and some of them are logistical. One, I would maybe either in the confirmation or in the materials put an end time. You know, it starts at 7 p.m., but I think if this is going to be a 2 or 3 hour meeting, that people need to know that what they're committed to, kind of thing.
Good idea. 9 o'clock.
Okay, so people should know that. So that would be good. I think I'm going to assume that a lot of people who come to this also may have come to our recent session where we took comments and may have heard a lot about the housing needs. So maybe when we think about the agenda, because that can be really dense, we shorten that part and refer people to the previous session as like, if you want to, you know, to prepare for this session, they can go and listen. It just seems like, you know, we only have 2 hours with them. We want to really get to the meat of it. I think maybe we could put a question under the visioning before we get into the town's greatest challenges, maybe to ask people, what does affordable housing mean to you? Because I do think what I have learned, the main thing I've learned about sitting in this working group is that we all have different ideas about what it means. And so maybe we could ask them to be a little bit clearer, like, does it mean that, you know, it's about tear downs, or does it mean about diversity? You know, what do they think of when it comes to affordable housing?
That's under the introduction, actually, Emily.
Great.
As an icebreaker, we're going to ask
Great.
every
Like
member
this,
about
Karen.
what affordable housing means to them. Yeah.
And just I think to kind of echo what Laura said, I'm trying to see the strategies, which I think are sent in a separate email. They include you know, so under the identify actions, we're going to give them suggestions. And some of those potential strategies are from the 2017 report, and some are new things, and some seem really specific and some seem really broad. And then not included in here is probably whatever the subcommittees come up with. So it seems like it's a little cart horse or egg, chicken egg. Like, I'm not quite sure. We're going to ask them about strategies that the subcommittees haven't actually even landed on what their strategies are. So maybe, and I was trying to reconcile this a little bit, like, we don't want to lead them down a path if that's not even a path we're going to even be talking about in a subcommittee. So maybe one of the things, rather than giving them, so I see somebody's trying to find it on the screen. It was an email that got sent out by Lee earlier today, had all the strategies listed out. Maybe we could share those, because I think maybe what would be helpful is if we put up the 2017 strategies and just say, this is what you used to, this is what it was 5 years ago. Are these still relevant? Are there things to add? Are there things to subtract? Rather than there were some more additional ones that have kind of been added on that seem really specific, like, you know, change this. I just thought it was kind of leading the audience a little bit.
Well, you know, in a lot of the workshops that I do, we don't give them any handout on strategies. We just like put it out there and what they think.
So that might be an option as well.
It might be useful. They don't have to look at them. The facilitator doesn't have to respond to them. And maybe this is certainly for this group to decide whether having the context of the 2007 strategies or kind of the list that we included in this is useful at all.
I think and I'm, maybe we could share this, or I can share my screen to share the email that went out. That's what I was referring to, is the list of the strategies.
Emily,
Want
are
me
you
to share it?
referring to the 3-page potential housing goals and strategies?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And it
This-
has
That would
4.
be a handout we would give to people, right? And at the top, it has
Yes.
4 goals, and we would say to them, these goals still resonate. And then there was potential housing strategies, and there were like 6 or 7, and they range from begin planning for the reuse of Stephen Palmer to allow 2-family housing by right in single residence B lots within a quarter mile of commuter rail station, which is very specific, right?
Mhm.
And then there's a list of the 27 affordable housing plan strategies, which I guess I was trying to say that some of the ones seemed really, some of the strategies seemed like we had already decided this and we're moving in that direction, or we're very required, made it seem like we had done a fair amount of work that we haven't done yet, I guess is part of it. But maybe that's just me. If you scroll up a little bit, that's what I'm talking about.
And let me follow up to clarify what Emily said and what these housing strategies say. Karen, these potential housing strategies, when it says were recommended for discussion, did these arise out of our earlier listening session? Or are they?
No, they were, some of them were, some of them came out of working group members' comments.
At various meetings.
And, it didn't make sense to me to do an exhaustive list of every laundry list of every conceivable action that we could possibly think of, nor was the list that was included in the listening session, I think, certainly not exhaustive. And we don't have to include this workshop handout at all. We could take out potential housing strategies and just include a list of the strategies that were included in the 2007 plan if people think that that would be more appropriate. Or, I don't expect that the facilitators are going to go through this during the breakout groups necessarily. I think it'd be useful for people who are registered to kind of, get this information just as background context. But that, people should, as far as actions, should suggest those that they think are important, even if they're not included at all. I mean, we're trying to be helpful and provide aids and assistance to people, but if folks think that it's going to be counterproductive, we don't have to do this. And that, I think that we put it out there for you guys to digest and say, does this make sense or not? Should we make changes? That type of thing.
Well, would it respond? There may be others who want to respond on this, but I just want to go around and make sure we've responded to Emily's concerns. If we were to include this list or something like it of potential housing strategies, would an introduction that says that these ideas came out of both of the listening session and out of comments made by members of the Housing Plan Working Group at prior meetings, make it clear that we're not dictating these ideas. We're just saying these are some ideas. But maybe Emily wants to speak again to that, or somebody else. I see Oscar is raising his hand.
So
too.
Jean, just to follow
yes.
up, like, I don't feel that the working group members personally have all given, I haven't given you my potential housing strategies, for example. I don't think I was asked for them either. So I think if we're going to say that these are representative of the working group and what we're thinking, then we should sit down and, do that. But I don't know that these are, these may be, things we heard, but if they came from the working group, I don't know that they came from the whole working group. So
the first meeting we had, though, each working group member kind of offered their,
Okay.
their opinions about kind of priority needs and actions, which were really helpful, I think,
Okay.
in getting us going. So part of this does reflect that. But
Well,
it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. And if people are going to think that this is going to be a problem to put out there, let's just, nip it in the bud.
Well, let's see what others have to say. Sometimes having some specific ideas to respond to can be helpful in such things as breakout groups. But Oscar,
Well,
is this?
I appreciate the concern that it doesn't necessarily reflect everyone's input, and not everybody has had time to digest and respond. But I also like the fact that we are keeping this as a live document that is continuing to evolve, and it's not exhaustive, but at least it's keeping a collection of either the past actions or past vision goals, so that we can continue to refer back and then think about how we would want to change them to make them more appropriate for our current conditions, and then continue to evolve housing strategies with everybody's input when they have time to do it. But I mean, I think if the caveat's there, that this is not an exhaustive, it doesn't necessarily reflect everybody's input, but at least it's a beginning or something to reference. So you're not all just coming in with, no reference or whatever personal references you have. I don't know. I would be in favor of doing this, but with the right caveats. And I think we should all be reading this, and we should all be giving responses to it. The challenge is, when are we going to do it? We have to do it on our own time. We don't really sit down and have conversations in this committee, which is, I was in one of my dreams. I guess I was thinking this is what we were going to do. We were going to talk about this stuff and meet and debate and throw out ideas, but we don't have time, so that we have to set up the time to do that in the subgroups.
Well, Karen, I know you were looking for comments from the group, but this went out to the Housing Plan Working Group only a couple of days ago, right? And I wonder if it would be satisfactory, having heard what's said tonight, and leaving it open for further comments that go directly to staff, not among the Housing Plan Working Group members. And Karen, we use your judgment about the changes that need to be made to address these comments. Will that work to produce a document that will be a good background document for those who participate in this upcoming?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that we've heard a number of things about actions, but we're still in the beginning of this action plan. And we really wanted to kick off the kind of the formulation of the action plan with this community housing workshop, which is going to be followed up by a community housing survey too. So we're going to, as Oscar said, this is going to be an evolution. So we'll ultimately get down to a package of actions that are prioritized and fleshed out to some degree, that this working group can come to some agreement on as part of ultimately the housing plan. But any comments, whatever, we'll do our best to, assimilate, and as long as it doesn't, I don't think it's useful to come up with a huge laundry list of actions. That's my concern. It doesn't get unwieldy. But yeah, ideas for people to make this better. We really entertain that. Those.
Okay, so let's now maybe there are comments about or questions about the role of the facilitators. Are we satisfied with what's been put forth? And I think we had that up on the screen before. Are there any other questions or comments about the role of the facilitators? And are we trying, Karen and Lee, are we trying to get people to raise their hand and say, yes, I'll be a facilitator? Are we trying to get that volunteerism at tonight's meeting?
I think we're assuming that the members of the committee will be the facilitators unless we hear from you otherwise. And that we'll assign you to a group depending upon what the turnout is.
There are 13 of us, and we
And it might
expect-
be the two facilitators are two members end up with one group. It really probably will all depend on how many people attend when we actually break it up into subgroups. I think we'll have some sense of that because we're requiring this pre-registration up to the day of the meeting. But I think most of the registration will happen early enough that we'll have a sense of how many people will be attending.
If someone's not interested in being a facilitator or is not going to be at the workshop, tell us. That will be helpful information. Otherwise, we'll just assume that you might be interested in being a facilitator.
All right. And Dan, you have.
Yeah, you're sending out an email to the group with some things about future roles and so on. You could ask people, I think, would you like to be a facilitator? Are you willing to be a facilitator? If we need a facilitator, would you rather not be a facilitator? And that will give you a roster to work from.
I was being optimistic.
That everybody would enjoy that role. Yeah. Well, perhaps, but perhaps not. And also point out we need a recorder as well. So in a way, we need two committee members. Or did you think that the recorders would be simply other people who sign up and get randomly into breakout groups?
If there were two working group members in a group, one could be the reporter, one could be the facilitator. Typically, the group someone volunteers in the group and says, I'm happy to keep notes and be the recorder. I mean, I've got to say that I've done a lot of workshops where we haven't assigned facilitators. The groups get together and somebody's assigned the facilitator role and someone's assigned the recorder role. So that this time we thought it would be useful for the working group members, if they were interested, to play that role.
The recorder has a very important role. That is to report back to the entire meeting on what the subgroup, what the breakout group had as its top 3 priorities, right? So that is an important role. Yes, we'll present the priority actions.
Usually reporters have good handwriting.
Okay, so with the 13 people, let's assume that we are going to have enough people to serve as facilitator and recorder. And if we're short, we'll find people in the breakout room who are willing to take on the role of recorder. All right. Is there anything more about this event coming up on the 24th? One thing I'll say is, to the extent you're involved with other groups, please publicize this. We got 69 people to come to the listening session, which I thought was very good. So we want to continue having a good, large group of people. Helen, I see your hand raised.
Thank you, Jean. Just one quick question logistically. Will there be a little notification between each section? So for example, when introductions are finished and it's time to move on to visioning, will we get that little alert through the Zoom breakout notification just to keep folks on track?
That's a good idea. I don't know.
It's really pretty easy to send a message.
Alex as coordinator should be able to do some of that.
That would be.
It is also the role of facilitator to keep their eye on the phone, on their watches, so that they know that it's about time. We've got about 5 more minutes on this. It's time to wind down. Let's try to get this together. But in another virtual meeting recently, the coordinator of the Zoom was able to kind of do a little announcement.
Thank you.
So that's a good idea. And why don't we think about whether the coordinator, you know, the town staff who's acting as coordinator could do that as a little announcement that every breakout room hears.
Sure, we'll try that. We'll find out. We're testing a technology next week and doing a practice run ourselves. So we'll try that as well.
Mhm. Okay. So if there's nothing else on plans for the community housing workshop, Lee Newman is going to discuss next steps. And
well, I think we just went through the workshop. So I think what we envision, after the workshop is a meeting, I think on April the 14th, at which time I think we're going to be doing just a debriefing from the workshop. And we're going to be working on a draft housing survey for you to review as a follow-up from the workshop. So that's what we have planned for the meeting on the 14th.
And then our final public meeting is going to be an important one. And I think we expect that will be in June.
No,
No? Oh, please, please.
we're not going to have a plan. We're going to be spending the summer preparing the plan. So we won't have a community-wide meeting until September. After the summer, where people are starting to focus again, we'll have a community meeting to present the plan and get feedback. But we'll be spending, a good part of, the subgroup information is due the end of May. So we're not going to be able to put it all together in a month, and then it'll take a little bit of time, particularly if we're having a steering committee in addition to these subgroups that are going to be involved. It's going to take some extra coordination and time.
So I don't know where I got the idea that we'd be presenting a draft plan in June. I had that in my head, but apparently I'm mistaken. So the presentation of a draft plan at a large community-wide meeting, we're expecting that in September. Is that our goal?
That's what the
Okay.
time frame said, the one that we worked out in the past,
Way out, way back. Okay, then. All right, so we will, of course, be having additional meetings beyond the April 14th.
I'll send out a
Want to
doodle
talk
poll
about
for
the
future
community?
meetings.
Want to talk about the community housing survey? That's what's. Somebody talk about the community housing survey. Is that the survey that's going to immediately follow the workshop? I thought we were talking about another separate survey, but please clarify.
I thought we were talking about a survey that was going to immediately follow the workshop, that was only going to go to the workshop participants so that they could vote on the strategies. So we would have a sense of how all the attendees at the workshop felt about the strategies, and we had a count from that total. But we also talked about then doing a survey kind of feeding on what we heard at the community workshop that would be available for all town residents who did not necessarily attend the workshop. That was a survey I think that Cindy, the communications officer, was going to assist us in putting together.
All right, I did think that we would be doing that. And so on April 14th, it'll be debriefing on the community housing workshop and review of the draft community housing survey, the one that would go to the extent
Townwide.
able to send it townwide. Okay. All right. Anything more? Is there any other business? I do want to say, as I think I said earlier in the meeting, that I very much appreciate the work that's being done on the MBTA Communities Act and regulations, and how we're what strategy Needham will have to comply with that. And it was suggested, I think, at a recent select board meeting, that an important role of this housing plan working group is going to be to incorporate that action plan in our final housing plan. Dan, do you want to talk to that?
Well, yeah, I'll speak a little bit to it, and it depends on, there are a lot of things going on. We're working on the housing plan on one track, and the guidelines, which are technically draft regulations right now, are currently under review at the state level. So it's hard to say how you're actually going to incorporate this into the housing plan, except to say that in the housing plan, you have to consider the effect of this issue and the rules that come out of it, whatever they may be. Just to give the group a picture, as I understand it at this point, the guidelines are currently under review by DHCD and are likely to be moved forward into some more final form. However, it is, without conjecturing too much, highly unlikely that they'll be adopted in exactly the form that they stand right now. That's because there are some issues and unresolved ambiguities in them. There's quite a bit of pushback from a number of communities that are going to want to have some influence on the process. The driving force is the Baker administration, which is, of course, ending in 10 months. And the new governor's administration will pick up the issue from that point. And there's a particular issue that Needham's staff has identified as a concern and working on, which is that the guidelines really encourage the town to have a participatory community process to develop revised zoning that will comply with the guidelines. But they then set deadlines for completion of the work, including adoption of the revised zoning, that just don't fit with the kind of timeframes that apply in most communities that have a robust process, and with town meetings usually held at certain times of year and certain kinds of hearing and notice requirements and so on, of which Needham and the way we do things is typical. So there's likely to be a lot of discussion about extending the timeframes for implementation of whatever comes out. So the bottom line is to say you have the draft guidelines, which really create a roadmap that we had to really be looking at seriously, but it's not likely to be implemented in exactly that form. However, given the basic principle that addressing the problem of the supply of market affordable housing in the metropolitan area has to be done on the basis of some strong program from the state, because the individual towns with 175 zoning authorities in the MBTA area, it won't happen that way on any reasonable timeline unless there's some incentive from the state. So a good way to think of the guidelines is as a framework that is likely to be revised, but likely to end up being implemented in the coming years in a form that closely resembles what the guidelines are. So I think that as we're crafting our report, we can just take notice of the fact that that's, and whenever this committee's report moves into its final phase, you're going to say, here is the current status of this. You have to take cognizance of it while you're working on the different elements that are affected, particularly around zoning, which is under the direction of the planning board, and take cognizance of these issues as it evolves. And then when you're writing your report, say, this is what the current status is, and here are the recommended courses for addressing it. Does that help?
Thank you very much, Dan, for that background. Oscar, you have a comment, a question on that? You're muted, Oscar. So
just to follow with Dan, yes, hi. Just to follow what Dan was saying. I think one of the things that's interesting, and the reason that we do need to obviously keep our eye on it, is that it's changing the way we would do, probably many towns do business, which is you're removing special permit process. So you're going for as of right. So there's a different way of thinking about how we approach the zoning, right? I mean, it's essentially, however it affects our thinking, it's going to affect our thinking, and it's affecting the process. So that's what I think is one of the fundamentals to this law, is that it's basically saying you have to make this as of right. And so I think
As of right, as compared to special permit.
right.
Yes.
So, and it deals with families and it deals with seniors. There's no limitation on families and seniors. So I think what's coming out of this is that we need to go, I think, be proactive with school planning, because that plateau or dip in 10, 20 years is maybe the dynamics changing, because there's potentially some growth. So I guess these are all things we're going to talk about, right? But spinning out of that MBTA law is a lot of really interesting things that are going to change the way we think about zoning too, I think, which is good.
Well, perhaps the capacity building group will give some thought to that. Before we end the meeting, I'm happy that we have Tim McDonald from our health department with us tonight. And Tim, I know that the Board of Health and the Council on Aging also, 3 or 4 years ago, were so helpful in initiating really the adoption of our accessory dwelling unit bylaw. And I wanted to give you the opportunity, Tim, since you're with us tonight, to have a say on any particular thing that you want to share with us.
Oh, thanks, Jean. I think we mostly built on a lot of the good work that Karen and Lee and Alex and the team had done. We were happy to be involved. The Public Health Division, the Board of Health, and the Council on Aging were happy to be involved on ADUs, and we're very happy that Ed Cosgrove from the Board of Health and Helen Gregory from the Council on Aging are part of this group. I'm very interested in the discussions, and I'm enjoying listening in. And I appreciate you having me here, but nothing to add beyond that right now.
Okay, well, thank you for being with us. All right, then I think that takes care of other business. Are we ready to adjourn? Is there a motion? Motion to adjourn by Dan Matthews. Do I hear a second?
Second.
And seconded by Oscar Mertz. I will call the roll on that. Oscar Mertz.
Yes.
Dan Matthews.
Yes.
Helen Gregory.
Yes.
Michael O'Brien.
Yes.
Ed Cosgrove.
Yes.
Ed Scheidler. Emily Cooper.
Yes.
Laura Dorfman.
Yes.
Marcus Nelson.
Yes.
Caro Fischetti.
Yes.
We stand adjourned. Thank you. And we'll, I'm sure, be communicating, as we said, on these various things. And we will see you all together on the 24th.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Good night.